A few people have asked in comments if I will respond to that ridiculous Telegraph article, so today I am going to respond to that ridiculous, did I mention ridiculous Telegraph article? Ridiculous isn't really a strong enough word for it. To be honest, I became pretty angry at times when researching for this video. Can you tell? That's why I've gone with angry earrings today. Anyway, it's been some time. I'm going to try not to be angry about it now, but it was much worse than I expected. The study that the article was based on is appallingly unscientific. It's honestly pretty embarrassing that a journalist, and this was somebody called Joe Pinkstone, let's name and shame, that they looked at that and then spared even the 5 minutes it probably took for them to throw this article together. The headline of the Telegraph article is "Autism Can Be Reversed, Scientists Claim." And no, this article was not from 2008. It was published in July. So let's find out. Let's see if we too can reverse our autisms today, I suppose. The article is basically just a very brief overview of a study with 2 non-identical twin girls, which apparently found some symptoms can be reduced to an indistinguishable level. By study, the Telegraph are referring to a case study, so a report that was written about a singular pair of twin girls, two girls who were both diagnosed autistic. As an autism expert from King's College London stated in this Daily Mail article, and you know you've done a bad when the Mail Online is out here accusing you of spreading misinformation. But this is essentially an anecdote, and we don't do anecdotes in science. Case studies can be a useful starting point. In research, this one is not a good example of that at all, but we certainly can't be using case reports to come to conclusions like autism can be reversed. And there are a lot of other reasons why this is harmful too, which we'll get onto in a minute. It's going to be an interesting journey. I went on an interesting journey while researching this video, but before I do, to help combat this sort of nonsense, I'm very glad to be partnering with Ground News again for this video. Ground News is a news aggregator app and website that compiles global news in one convenient platform, allowing you to assess the reliability of each source, understand its political biases, and see its ownership. I've got the Telegraph article up again here, yay! And as you can see, I've installed the Ground News Bias Checker browser extension. With this, I can see that the Telegraph is deemed mixed factuality. The bias distribution feature makes it clear that the Telegraph is a right-wing outlet. I can click down here to view the full coverage of the story on the Ground News website and compare 16 different sources covering this topic. By contrast, we can see that Reuters published this very in-depth breath of fresh air. Fact check: study does not show autism can be reversed, experts say. Thank goodness for that. A US study does not show severe autism can be reversed, contrary to misleading headlines shared on social media making that claim and calling the results a miracle. On Ground News, it's easy to see that Reuters is a high factuality source, which is reassuring. Over on the left, Euronews, a mixed factuality source, describes the study's findings, but also discusses how deeply insulting it is to autistic people to suggest that autism can be cured, quoting the National Autistic Society. Ground News also has a Discover feature, so I can keep up with hundreds of topics that matter to me, such as LGBTQ+, health, and autism. I really believe in their mission. I think it's much needed in the current political climate where we're all exposed to so little outside of our own personal algorithms. You can check out Ground News at ground.news/nowwhat or scan the QR code on screen. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan. Thank you to Ground News for encouraging independent thinking. So from the Ground News website, we can actually click through to the study, to the case report. They have that there as one of the sources. Let's unpack. The case report was published in the Journal of Personalized Medicine a few months ago. It was the work of Christopher D'Adamo and colleagues. Christopher seems to be an assistant professor at the University of Maryland. The case report is titled "Reversal of Autism Symptoms Among Dizygotic Twins Through a Personalized Lifestyle and Environmental Modification Approach." Basically, this case report documents how these 2 young girls, referred to here as L and P, were diagnosed when they were around 20 months, so under 2 years old. At the time, they were judged as being level 3 autistic, so medical professionals felt that they would be needing very substantial support from the people around them. Level 3 is the highest level of support needs an autistic person can have according to the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. And the report is basically the story of how the parents were determined to, as it states, reverse this diagnosis. To do so, they put their 2 girls through so many different interventions. I combed through the report and found every little thing that they did. I'm going to read you the full list of them now, and I'll talk more about these different interventions and whether there's actually any evidence for any of them later on. There are some of the usual suspects here. The girls did 11 months of ABA therapy for 20 hours per week. They did speech therapy from when they turned 2 years old onwards. They followed the READ diet, which involves reducing sources of glutamate. They ate a gluten-free diet. They ate a casein-free diet. They ate a low-sugar diet. They removed artificial colors. They removed artificial dyes from their diet. They had no ultra-processed foods. They ate organic foods. They ate freshly prepared home-cooked foods. They ate from local sources. They took omega-3 fatty acids. They took a multivitamin. They took a vitamin D supplement. They took carnitine supplements. They took this, like, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but this folate supplement is basically a biologically active form of folate. They took bio-individualized homeopathic remedies. They ate a diet rich in tryptophan to upregulate serotonin production. They consumed foods rich in B12. They consumed foods rich in B6. They consumed foods rich in folate, foods high in biotin, ate foods high in choline. They supplemented with lion's mane, mushrooms. No dosages were given for this at any point during the case report, and no dosages were given for any of the other things that they took either, which, you know, much science. They supplemented with something called resolvins, which come from some types of omega-3 fatty acids. They did intensive occupational therapy. Apparently, they spent more time on this than any other intervention. I don't think it states how long in the report, but obviously it does say they spent 20 hours per week doing ABA therapy, so apparently more than 20 hours per week on intensive occupational therapy, but it was focused on neurosensory motor reflex integration, which is an alternative therapy that I'll talk more about later on. They also had a building biology environment consultant come to evaluate their home. This was to test for air quality, mold, and moisture risk. They found that the home was clean, there wasn't any mold, but then they were kind of encouraged to keep on investigating. They got a thermal imaging camera, and they also used a moisture meter to check for water damage. And this then found that a window in the twins' room needed further evaluation, but then this isn't mentioned again in the case report, so I don't know if anything more happened to do with that. They opened windows for better cross ventilation, and then one of the girls, Elle, saw a cranial osteopath, and this was at the recommendation of a developmental optometrist. This is again an alternative pseudoscientific therapy that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. So if my count is correct, maybe I missed a few because there's a lot in there, but that's 30. That is 30 different things that they did simultaneously at the same time in the space of about 2 years. So basically between the ages of just about to turn 2 and 4 years old, they were doing all of this, all of these things. Even if they had managed to cure their daughters, which, you know, autism can't be cured, and the evidence that they are cured, in quotation marks, that the autism was reversed, as it says in the title of this case report and in the Telegraph article, pretty questionable. We're going to talk more about that later on, but okay, say that it had been reversed, they're cured, no autism detected. How would we know which of these interventions, which of these 30 things was responsible for this? It is so ridiculously unscientific to do all of these things at the same time. It renders this report absolutely meaningless. I mean, it is meaningless, but it makes it extra meaningless, okay? The report concludes with the words, "Future prospective studies are warranted to confirm these findings." And I just want to scream, what findings? What did you find? So you're recommending more research where parents try 30 different interventions all at once. Is this the special, like, magic combination? Do all of these things need to be done at the same time in order to cure autism? Don't worry, Christopher et al. Have figured out the magic sauce. Doesn't have the dosages for any of the supplements used, but he's figured it out. That's sarcasm. And speaking of being unscientific, I mean, they are literally documenting here how they sought to eradicate the autism in these two girls, celebrating the fact that they managed to make them indistinguishable, in their words, from other little girls. But the idea that their autism has been cured, has been reversed, goes against scientific consensus. Autism is lifelong. It cannot be cured, and it is a neurodevelopmental condition. It is not an illness. There are a lot of red flags in this report. I mean, it literally opens with the sentence, "The prevalence of autism has been increasing at an alarming rate." It's always alarming to me personally when I hear people discussing autism this way, as if it's a virus, as if it's an epidemic, as if it's coming for your children. It's very much the vibes of that 2009 advert from the controversial charity Autism Speaks called "I Am Autism."
And if you are happily married, I will make sure that your marriage fails.
have a video about Autism Speaks if you want to watch that one. I think I was wearing these earrings then as well. In the report, they kind of do mention as an aside that we've got better at diagnosing people as autistic, but I still feel like it's pretty fearmongery the way it's phrased. They don't mention the fact that autism diagnosis has always been on the rise, because we just continually keep getting a lot better at diagnosing autistic people, particularly people from marginalized groups, which the CDC makes clear. Even now, half of all autistic adults in the UK might be undiagnosed. Personally, I think the alarming thing was leaving so many neurodivergent children undiagnosed for so long. My wonderful, very highly intelligent grandpa passed away this year at age 84. How much would an autism diagnosis in his childhood in the 1940s, which was when autism was first being described? So we need to remember that autism is still very new, but how much would a diagnosis in his childhood have helped him, even just to understand himself, to understand his extreme sensitivity to noise? But back then, autism was thought to be incredibly rare, and even when my grandpa was just slightly younger than I am now in 1966, we still thought the prevalence was only 4.5 children per 10,000. Maybe environmental factors have had an impact on increased diagnosis rates since then. I don't know, but I appreciate it when researchers stay realistic about how autism has been historically so under-recognized. After stating the prevalence rate, they go on to describe autism as having often debilitating personal, familial, and societal consequences. And they emphasize the cost of autism to society. Again, we're getting I Am Autism vibes. They quote estimates that it could reach nearly 15 trillion of lifelong costs by 2029. I mean, if everyone is trying 30 different interventions all at once, maybe it will cost 15 trillion. Just saying, you know, maybe if we don't do all of that, might keep the costs down a little bit. I'm not sure how on earth they went about estimating this, but I do think it's important to remember that autistic people can have all different levels of support needs. Autistic people are all so different from each other. How do you measure the cost of one autistic person to society? Regardless, it's clear that we're coming at this from a very negative place, from a place of autistic people are a net negative, are a burden on society, and that's why we need to cure, we need to reverse this. Another huge red flag is how this case study makes the assumption that autism has an environmental cause. I suppose that has to be the case in order for them to claim it has an environmental solution. The parents of these two girls, they state that their daughter's diagnosis is a result of not one single factor that catalyzed their diagnosis, but the combined assault of many injuries. So they view it, as unfortunately too many parents do, they view it as something that happened to their children. They had these healthy children and then they were injured by something in their environment and they became sick and autistic. This is once again not the current scientific consensus at all. We have known that autism is hereditary since the 1970s. If you have a pair of identical twins and one twin is autistic, apparently there's an 80% chance that the other twin will be diagnosed as well, and some studies suggest this rate may be even higher. But this case report from 2024 focuses in on this one particular twin study from 2011. This study happened to conclude that environmental factors were a bigger contributor than genetics, at 58% compared to 38%. This study was criticized at the time when it was released back in 2011 for potentially oversampling concordant fraternal twin pairs. So basically they may have included too many pairs of non-identical twins where just both twins happened to be autistic, which kind of skewed the results and made it seem like environmental factors have more of an impact than they actually do. The case report here actually even acknowledges that limitation, and yet they still chose to include the study for 2011 as evidence that environment may play a bigger role than genetics in autism, I suppose just because it fits their narrative. At the time that this 2011 study was published, an expert actually said even if they hadn't oversampled these concordant fraternal twin pairs, it's likely that the researchers are underestimating the role of genetics in autism, even with diseases that are unquestionably genetic, such as congenital heart disease. Sometimes one identical twin has the disease and the other does not. That's because elements of chance are always involved in developmental processes. For example, spontaneous genetic mutations can crop up in one twin and not the other. Identical twins can also carry different chemical modifications to DNA that change how their genes are expressed. And since 2011, surprise, surprise, we have not confirmed that the environment plays a bigger role than genetics in whether somebody will be autistic. We've concluded that it's super complicated. About 100 genes are considered strongly linked to autism. There are environmental factors with a link to autism that may interact with genetic factors. Maternal immune response and parental age, particularly having an older father, are examples. Interestingly, both younger and older mothers seem to have a link, but again, it's complicated. It's correlation, not necessarily causation. Maybe older parents are more likely to have autistic children because they themselves may be autistic, and maybe it takes them longer to find a partner to have a child with, or maybe they decide to put it off until later in life for some other reason. And maybe autistic women, who we know are often diagnosed later in life, maybe autistic women are more likely to have children at a younger age or even become pregnant in their teens. And there does seem to be a link with teen pregnancy and having autistic children. In general, it's just really hard to identify environmental causes in autism, which makes sense. How do you know exactly what someone was exposed to and when? How do you know what their parents were exposed to? How do you know what they were exposed to in the womb? The way in which environmental exposure is measured is flawed, like combing back through old medical records to find out what a person was prescribed during their pregnancy. We're exposed to so much all of the time. How do you isolate it? By doing 30 different things at once, apparently. That's sarcasm. Sorry, there's a lot of sarcasm going to be happening in this video. I'll try and put tone tags on screen whenever I do. If you see /s, it's me being sassy and sarcastic. When these earrings are on, can't help it. Despite the fact that it's very difficult to isolate potential environmental links with autism, not necessarily causes of autism, links. In the case report we're looking at today, the authors state, with a bit too much confidence, specific modifiable environmental and lifestyle risk factors for ASD include exposure to environmental toxicants, poor diet, disruption of the gut microbiota, excessive exposure to non-native electromagnetic fields, brackets, EMFs, and accumulation of heavy metals. We do not have good, conclusive evidence that any of these things are environmental risk factors for autism. Interestingly, the father of the twins in this case report is 51 years old, so that's one potential environmental risk factor that's actually evidence-based that they do have. That's not mentioned anywhere within this case report. I suppose you can't do anything to fix that, and they want to fix it, so no point in focusing in on that. Instead of mentioning the father's age, they just cite a load of sources for the supposed environmental risk factors that I just mentioned, but the sources are utterly ridiculous. For example, as evidence that environmental toxicants are a cause of autism, they have provided 3 links to articles from 2008 and 2009 published in a magazine called Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine. Now, this source sent me down a little bit of a dark rabbit hole. In 2008, the editor of this magazine published an article that is eerily similar in many ways to this 2024 case report. This magazine article was titled, "Autism, Is It All in the Head?" And this article implied that autism is caused by basically everything. Sound familiar? Vaccines included. But apparently, if we were to cure autism, the good news is that we would also cure everything. The author refers to autism as a hologram. Autism is a hologram for chronic disease. In it is reflected all the causes and cures for chronic disease. Autism is an extreme manifestation of disruptions in normal biology that exist in varying degrees in most chronic illness. Apparently, if we find out the causes of autism, we'll finally understand cancer and Alzheimer's and obesity and chronic fatigue too. It's all sounding a little bit too similar to the psychiatrist Dr. Chris Palmer, who thinks autism can be cured with a ketogenic diet. And don't worry, keto was briefly mentioned in this case report. I don't think the girls have tried that one yet, but maybe they're going to start that next week. This hologram article, it focuses in on one toddler, and there is a horrific sentence here. By unraveling the tangled roots of his distress, we were able to address the systemic causes of his broken brain. 2008-2009 was not a good time for autism acceptance. This was the same time in which the I Am Autism ad was released. I feel like I read a lot of unhinged autism takes from around that time. Maybe we had a lot of environmental toxins in the water that year, turning everybody ableist. I don't know, we might want to look into the root causes of that. But that quote reminds me of the twin parents in the 2024 case report when they say a combined assault of many injuries caused their children to be autistic. I mean, you can't, there's no way you would put your children through all of this if you didn't believe that they were broken, if you didn't view autism very negatively as something that's very wrong with them rather than an intrinsic, inseparable part of who they are. Also, another worrying parallel our case report does mention, the parents noticed a worsening of some symptoms after a round of vaccinations, including significant language loss for L. And L is how they refer to one of the girls, the one who was judged as having more autistic symptoms, as they would say. Vaccines aren't mentioned again elsewhere in the report, but it's interesting that they thought that was worth including. Of course, the whole autism and vaccines thing has been long debunked. It stemmed from a fraudulent paper about the MMR vaccine, which has now been fully retracted for many, many years. Just as an aside, this Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine magazine, shortly after the Broken Brain hologram guy, they actually hired another editor, and this editor was barred from practicing medicine in Texas because he used junk science and inappropriately diagnosed toxigenic mold exposure. So this magazine is not a reputable source at all. Maybe Christopher et al. Leave it out of your next 2024 case report. If we move on to their claim that an unspecified poor diet is an autism risk factor, the sources cited here are unsurprisingly questionable as well, and there are so many of them. It nearly broke my computer when I ran my mouse over them. There were so many. Quantity over quality here. If there was really good evidence for what you were saying, surely we wouldn't be needing to do all of this. So let me just give you some of the greatest hits that are cited here. We have a study on just 17 people on something called the GAPS diet, which apparently reduced autistic behaviors, but they stated that more research was needed. They've linked this study from 2011. This was their favorite time in research. Apparently, this is when all the good autism research was happening between the years 2008 and 2011. Nothing has moved forward since then. It was a study of less than 100 children, and it just simply links gastrointestinal issues to being autistic. We know that that is a common comorbidity. It doesn't say anything about autism being caused by bad diet. There's a study that basically just says autistic people can have sensory issues when it comes to food, which, you know, like not a huge revelation, and again has nothing to do with poor diet causing somebody to be autistic. There was another small study on keto. Again, I'm really surprised that they didn't put these girls through keto. They were doing so much, but keto and gluten-free as well. This study states that both diets improved autistic manifestations. Have you had any autistic manifestations today? Comment below. And last, but absolutely by no means least, they cited this 2017 study. So we're getting a bit more recent now, you know, only 6 years old. Groundbreaking new research. But this study suggested that camel milk might be a good treatment option. There is just such a pattern here of these researchers citing 10 to 15-year-old studies with really small sample sizes. Their sources for the disruption of gut microbiota being an environmental risk factor mostly simply state again that there is a link between being autistic and having gastrointestinal issues, which is true, but once again, when two things appear together, it does not mean that one is causing the other. Correlation, not causation. And then they also listed exposures to non-native electromagnetic electric fields and heavy metals as risk factors. There were no sources cited for heavy metals causing people to be autistic. I guess that one just goes without saying. But for electromagnetic fields, we got Wi-Fi is an important threat to human health. The guy who wrote that is a retired professor who is very anti-5G. He is known for using selective evidence and ignoring research that mobile phone technology is actually fine. And then we have another study, this time from 2006, So we're creeping even older. The older the better, right? Sarcasm again. Which is again just one guy's thoughts about how electromagnetic radiation might affect mirror neurons and cause autism. So because despite all of this bad evidence, the parents in our case report were set on the idea that their daughters had been made autistic by their environment, they tried these 30 different environmental interventions to get to the root cause. As they say, that's another kind of alternative medicine thing. The root cause of the issue. Conventional medicine just doesn't fix the root cause, you know? Except from, I don't know how doing 30 different things at once is going to help you get anywhere near a root cause. But they had a reason for doing 30 different things at once. Actually, it was to try and reduce the girls' allostatic load. Allostatic load is an actual scientific phrase that refers to the effects of chronic stress on your mind and your body. I think autistic burnout is probably an example of allostatic overload. It's basically the health consequences of being in a fight or flight state over the long term. But this paper seems to be misrepresenting the phrase allostatic load. They've taken it to mean something completely different, once again, to kind of fit their narrative. They're using it to refer to anything in the environment that they deem harmful, from gluten to 5G. This is another red flag of pseudoscience, misusing scientific terms to make something appear credible, but using them incorrectly. The case report actually does reference this paper, which talks about environmental stresses and how that can increase children's allostatic load. They mean things in your environment that might put you in a chronic stress response. So abuse, for example, having a very chaotic home environment, or living in poverty, not exposure to 5G or heavy metals. That's not what they were saying. They were saying having a stressful life. Hopefully these two girls didn't have too much to be stressed about at 20 months old, but I think having parents like this who are willing to put you through 30 different interventions in an attempt to basically turn you into a different person, it might be kind of hard to chill out in that environment. I would say they're definitely at a risk of increasing these girls' actual allostatic load if you look at the true meaning. I don't want to misuse the phrase abuse, but I do really worry about children who are in these kind of situations where their parents are so fixated on trying to fix them. I can't imagine what that does to a person, and I'm sure so many autistic people have been through that. Probably people watching the channel as well. If you were in a similar situation, I am so sorry. This is not right and you didn't deserve it. I want to unpack some of these interventions in more detail and see if there's actually any evidence for them. So all of these interventions were done under the guidance of these two self-proclaimed autism parent coaches. They run a website called Autism Parenting Secrets, which is cited in the report. They are a couple who are experts in marketing and business development, not medical professionals. But don't worry, Len, the guy, is a certified Bulletproof Human Potential Institute coach. They sound like just the right people to come along and cure your child's autism. Sarcasm again. So this case report is literally a description of how these two girls' parents paid these autism coaches to tell them how to cure their daughters. And of course, autism cannot be cured. And as I say later on, I will talk about whether these girls were actually cured, whether their autism was actually reversed. Spoiler alert, that's impossible, so no. These two parent coaches do not have some sort of secret magical answer that the medical community does not. They themselves have an autistic son. I guess we should use past tense because according to them, he is no longer autistic due to his body's innate power to heal. They also very much frame autism as an illness. They speak about how their son became sick and then he was diagnosed autistic. Their son is 17 now and apparently thriving, so I guess that means he can't be autistic because there's no way autistic people can thrive in these people's minds. Their website really encourages you to become an all-in parent and to know that there's always something you can do. It sounds like a lot of pressure. It increases my allostatic load just reading about it. It feels like it's exploiting parents who are feeling very vulnerable, who maybe have very good intentions but are just misguided, and they, really want to help their child and they really want to feel like they're doing more. Just as an aside, I wonder how many parents who get drawn into this kind of thing and become very, very fixated on trying to fix their children. I wonder how many of them could potentially be undiagnosed autistic themselves and just be very tunnel visioned on trying to, save their children, trying to feel like they're doing enough. Autistic people can so often be so incredibly perfectionist. Who knows? If you want to know a little bit more about that, tunnel focus in autism, I will leave a link to my video about monotropism. It's my favorite theory of how autistic minds work. Anyway, I'd love to know how much this couple charge, but I suppose I'd have to book a one-to-one discovery call in order to find out, which I haven't done. They don't seem to have any specific treatment plan that they recommend. It just seems to be do as much as you can. I think this was something that came up quite a lot in the case report, this idea that autism is complicated, autism is not simple, so the solution is not going to be simple, and that's why we need to throw everything at it. The case report actually states that the parents listened to autism-focused audio materials provided by their coach. And this links you straight back to their website, so I'm assuming that these autism-focused audio materials are actually just their podcast. Just to give you a sense of what their podcast is like, they have episodes titled "Baby Formula is Toxic." They really like capitalizing at least one word in these titles. "Lipids are the missing link. Brain allergies are in the way. Are you allergic to brains? Autism is treatable. Take water safety seriously. Brain on fire starts in utero. The food supply is toxic. Algae is your nutritional superstar." And then we also have "Your acceptance is key." I mean, I quite like that last one, but their entire website feels like the exact opposite of acceptance. I mean, this case report, it's just the exact opposite of acceptance. It's complete resistance of reality. This feels like I will try every last thing on earth before I accept that my child is autistic. So under the guidance of Cass and Len, our autism coaches, the parents in the case report proceeded to do all of the things that I listed earlier in this video. This included several pseudoscientific alternative therapies, including homeopathy. One girl saw a cranial osteopath. This is an alternative treatment that uses gentle touch to feel non-existent rhythmic movements of the skull's bones and supposedly adjust the immovable joints of the skull to achieve a therapeutic result. As this paper concludes, patients should invest their time, money, and health elsewhere. But apparently one of the girls saw notable benefits, including overall disposition and communication. But again, surely it's impossible to know that these improvements in communication came from this intervention specifically. They saw an occupational therapist. Again, this was apparently the intervention to which they dedicated the most time. Occupational therapy is actually quite a common conventional therapy for autistic people to help with learning things like self-care skills. There's loads of different stuff that an occupational therapist can do to help autistic people. But this, of course, it wasn't your standard occupational therapy. That would be too easy. It was something called neurosensory motor reflex integration. It's this idea that certain conditions and even trauma can cause you to have primitive reflexes. But by doing particular movements and exercises, you can fix this and heal your nervous system, and some people believe treat things like autism and intellectual disabilities. It was created by a Russian psychologist in 1989, and most of the studies on its effectiveness come from the psychologist herself or her organization. We unsurprisingly do not have evidence that this cures autism or anything else. Alongside the environmental therapies, the parents did the whole thing of checking for mold and damp in their home, which didn't really lead anywhere, but they still opened windows for better ventilation and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, having mold can be very bad for your health, can cause asthma, can even lead to death. So it's not good to have mold in your environment. But as with the guy, the editor, who was barred from practicing medicine for overdiagnosing toxigenic mold exposure, some people take the whole mold thing too far as, it being the cause of everything that could possibly be wrong with you. Mold does not cause you to be autistic, of course. But yes, they were still encouraged to open their windows for better cross ventilation. So if any of you watching this are feeling a bit autistic today, crack open a window if you like. It'll sort it right out. It's like motion sickness. Just roll down your window. Honestly, this is just the strangest intervention soup, but it continues. Perhaps literally, let's talk about some of the dietary interventions that they did in a bit more depth. They followed a diet called Reed, and the creator of this diet,
What are we eating?
Is actually the parent of another supposedly recovered autistic daughter, Dr. Catherine Reed. So yes, she named the diet after herself. Apparently it stands for Reduced Excitatory Inflammatory Diet, but I imagine her surname came first before the name of the diet, so she picked the words to fit that. Dr. Reed has a PhD in chemistry, so she's not a medical doctor and not an expert in nutrition either. On her website, which is called Unblind My Mind, she states, "My daughter is no longer considered on the autism spectrum, which is managed 100% through diet!" Exclamation mark.
And my story is the discovery that what I was feeding my family was associated with my child's autism.
Her supposed miracle diet involves avoiding glutamate. She sees MSG as the source of all America's health problems, it seems. And of course, she sees autism as one of those health problems.
And I was devastated when my youngest, Brooke, I discovered that she had autism.
Needless to say, I wouldn't recommend that anybody follows this woman's diet. We have no evidence that cutting out MSG will cure your autism. The FDA regard MSG as safe, and I personally love it. Maybe someone should write a case report about how I'm autistic and I like to eat MSG. And then the Telegraph will publish an article about it. That sounds right up their street. MSG turned me autistic. Obviously doesn't explain why my husband and son also eat the same as me, and neither of them have turned autistic yet, but surely it's only a matter of time. One tiny little study of rats concluded that giving pregnant rats MSG, and this was in huge quantities, it was basically the equivalent of me having 500 grams of MSG. And we have a little 100-gram tin of MSG, which we've had for years. You use the tiniest bit when you use MSG in cooking. So they were giving them huge doses. And I also don't know what an autistic rat looks like. Their marble burying and self-grooming was a bit off, apparently. But I mean, if you really want to avoid MSG in pregnancy, I suppose go ahead. It probably won't cause you any harm to avoid it. You're free to do that if you want to. But we do not have evidence that glutamate or MSG causes autism. This diet is definitely not evidence-based. The girls in our case report, unsurprisingly, also went gluten-free. This is quite a popular one. Abby's mom, who is an autism mom, who I have reacted to several times on this channel, she has also tried the gluten-free diet with her daughter. So even when the children are adults, some moms continue to try these sort of interventions.
So you came to me and you wanted to do a TikTok on
that gluten-free diet I didn't like.
Right. Gluten-free diet.
I didn't like it.
Do you know why we tried it?
To see if it'll help me focus. I tried it. I didn't like it. And some other people on the autism spectrum were never on it, so I got very jealous.
And then some people we know on the autism spectrum were on it, and they stayed on it.
But not me.
Right, but did it help those other people? It did.
I agree. I wouldn't want to, go gluten-free unless I had to. If you're celiac, very good idea to be gluten-free. Otherwise, you're probably fine. Eat your pasta. On their autism and diet page, the British Dietetics Association state, some people report feeling better when removing these foods from their diet, but there aren't any evidence to support this at the moment. And this goes for casein as well, which is another protein that the girls had removed from their diet. No diet is going to cause you to be autistic. No diet is going to cure you. I do want to add here that if as an autistic adult eating a certain way makes you feel better, you feel like it improves your mental health, as long as you're healthy, as long as you're eating enough food and you're not losing weight and you are not, at risk for deficiencies, if you're eating a very restrictive diet in some way, you probably do want to see a dietitian. But as an adult, you're free to make your own choices and do whatever feels best for you. I do feel worried though when parents are putting children, particularly children who are so young and still so early on in their development, on these very, very restrictive diet. I mean, they did so many interventions here. It doesn't really give an example of what the girls eat on a day-to-day basis anywhere in the case report. So again, going to be kind of difficult to replicate these findings, but okay then. It just feels like you're putting them at risk of deficiency, particularly if they do have sensory issues with food and struggle with eating, which, many autistic people do. They've included studies to say as much within this case report.
The only vegetable I like to eat is broccoli, and that's it.
And it made me feel mad when this Dr. Reed, she kind of laughs about how her daughter dislikes drinking this smoothie that she drinks every single day in order to, cure her autism.
These were supplemented in our morning smoothie, which consists of organic vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, herbs. But that smoothie still remains as part of our routine today. Probably not part of Brooke's favorite routine.
Autistic people can really, really struggle with food. I really, really struggled with food growing up. I still do to some extent, but particularly when I was a child, I had a lot of sensory sensitivities around food. I wonder how much compassion these parents will have for their children's sensory sensitivities when they feel like we're doing this diet for the greater good. We're doing this diet because you're ill and I need to make you better. Apparently, the parents in the case report did see a dietitian. I am a little bit wary of what sort of professional they will have selected. Their selection of professionals so far has not been ideal. Under this dietitian, the girls did take a lot of supplements. The BDA does recommend that autistic children maybe take supplements, maybe take multivitamins, because, autistic children might be more at risk of deficiencies if they are more picky eaters because of sensory sensitivities. So that might be good. I don't know why they also put an emphasis on eating more foods rich in B12 and foods rich in B6 and things like that, when surely if you're taking a multivitamin, they would also be in there. But I mean, you can't really eat too much of B vitamins, you'll just wee out the excess. So I suppose that's fine. There's not really any risk to that. It just might be a bit unnecessary. And again, just feels like you're doing so much. You don't need to be doing so much. Everyone calm down, decrease your allostatic load. As I said, they did also supplement with lion's mane mushroom, and no dose is specified for this. I feel like this whole mushrooms thing is quite a fad at the moment. You get a lot of those coffees. I think it's Four Sigmatic is one of the brands where they'll maybe not specify the dose of mushrooms that's actually in the coffee, and then the dosage, is very likely super, super low, way lower than the dosages that have been studied. So it's basically just coffee. It's not going to do that much, and it's super, super, super expensive. So again, just feels pretty exploitative. This small survey from 2020 found that benefits and satisfaction from lion's mane mushrooms were lowest in autistic people, even at the highest doses. They took carnitine as well, and the case report actually cites this paper, which is titled Autism and Carnitine, a Possible Link. But I'm not sure if they actually read it. I feel like this with most of their sources, did you actually read them? I don't know. Some people with autism, brackets, less than 20%, seem to have L-carnitine metabolism disorders, and for these patients, a dietary supplementation with L-carnitine is beneficial. So over 80% of autistic people have no issues with carnitine, but for the small number of autistic people who do, they might want to take a supplement. There's nothing about it being a cause of their autism. The only environmental links this study actually mentions are the evidence-based ones, such as parental age. They also avoided artificial colors and dyes, and they ate organic. I mean, fine, but expensive and has nothing to do with autism. Sadly, I think the most important and the most influential therapy they did here, alongside speech therapy, was ABA therapy. The girls were put through a lot of ABA therapy when they were still under 2 years old. I mean, for me, at age 28, 20 hours per week of therapy would be a hell of a lot. I mean, Autism Speaks, again, the controversial autism charity, they recommend 25 to 40 hours of ABA therapy per week, and it's like a part or full-time job for a small child. ABA is an extremely controversial therapy, but it's still viewed by very many medical professionals as the gold standard in autism treatment. We don't really do it so much here in the UK. I'm sure you can access it if you want to, but it's not available through the NHS, which I'm grateful for. It's a very, very big industry over in America, though. It's valued at around $4 billion US, which now I'm thinking about it probably contributes to the fact that the cost of autism is so high when a lot of autistic children are subjected to 20 to 40 hours of ABA therapy per week. How much does that cost? I spoke about the very dark origins of ABA therapy in this video about stimming, which I'll leave linked on screen, but ABA therapy has been linked with PTSD in autistic people. Based on the findings, the author predicts that nearly half of ABA-exposed autistic children will be expected to meet the PTSD criteria 4 weeks after commencing the intervention. ABA therapy is all about behavior change. They use positive reinforcement, so rewards like praise, sometimes even foods like, a piece of chocolate or something like that, or like access to a video that a child loves to encourage when they've done something that they consider a positive behavior, and then they use consequences for negative behaviors. ABA is often used to increase a child's social skills. So you might reward a child for making eye contact or for playing in a way that's considered appropriate, rather than a more more kind of stereotypical autistic way, like you doing some sort of repetitive movement with a toy, like flapping a toy or lining toys up. Just as an aside, it confuses me so much that so many parents and, supposed therapists are so fixated on trying to pathologize play. This appears in the case report we're looking at today. It describes the girls as having repetitive play actions, and that one girl was showing functional pretend play but struggled to share enjoyment in joint play. Functional pretend play. Is your play functional? That's what we all want from our play, isn't it? For it to be functional. Isn't fun short for functional? I'm joking, it's not. Similarly, Dr. Reed took issue with her daughter's play.
Her entire play consisted of arranging her animals in a repetitive, obsessive, particular way. And this was her entire play. She had no imaginary play.
I understand that sometimes autistic children might want to learn more social skills in order to integrate with other people. As an autistic person, you can often feel very isolated, but sometimes also your autistic person might be having the time of their life, even if they're doing something on their own. Autistic people often need time on our own. Lining things up might be super soothing, super satisfying to your autistic child's brain. It might help them to, relieve anxiety, to feel like they've got everything in the right place. They might be having a good time, even if it looks odd to you. This is coming from somebody who played by flapping my Barbie doll's hair, walking around on my tiptoes. Yes, it looked a bit weird, but in my head, I was telling a very vivid story about what my dolls were doing. Playing like that was how I remained focused, how I unlocked my imagination. I think to an ABA therapist, it probably would have looked like I was doing pointless movements, like unimaginative, repetitive, but it was actually the opposite. It was actually super immersive and imaginative. I had way more fun doing that than when I did try and make myself, play normally with other people. Why do we need to police fun? For the sake of conformity, I suppose. That's really boring. But the aim of ABA therapy was, and arguably very much still is, to make autistic children indistinguishable from their peers. And what is this case report all about? Two girls who were apparently made indistinguishable from their peers. It literally uses the word indistinguishable. Both the report and the Telegraph article are celebrating that fact. So really, basically none of the interventions we spent ages talking about here really mattered at all, because they were done at the same time as doing this intervention, ABA therapy, which is focused on behavior change. And then what does this case report measure? The girls' behavior change. One interesting but not really surprising, if you're familiar with autism research, thing about this case report is they did not consider the girls' mental health or their quality of life at all. There's kind of a nod to the fact that the girls tolerated the treatment plan, but that's it. This is not uncommon at all. In this 2020 review, they looked at 770 studies on ABA therapy. They planned to take into account quality of life changes for the autistic people, but they couldn't do that because not one of the 770 papers on ABA therapy, not one of them thought to measure quality of life. It is always about managing behaviors when it comes to autism. It is so rarely about whether autistic people are happy. That needs to change. Anyway, the way they measured these girls' so-called improvements was also pretty unscientific. Even their original diagnosis as autistic, as level 3 support needs autistic, that was not really typical. When the girls were diagnosed ASD level 3, requiring very substantial support at 20 months old, they did a diagnostic test called the ADOS-2, but because of the pandemic and the use of face masks, it was administered in a non-standard way. It was used qualitatively, and so they were given no numerical score at the end of this. So when they reevaluated the twins a couple of years later, when they deemed them to have, reversed their autism, there was no actual ADOS-2 score to compare to because they were never given a score in the first place. Instead, it was just a list of behaviors. And there is nothing in this report to suggest that the girl's diagnosis was actually removed. I imagine they still have this diagnosis. It's still on their medical record. Nothing was reversed. So when they repeated the ADOS-2, this is what they said of the girl's behavior. Clinical reevaluation using ADOS-2 at Children's National Hospital revealed that no sensory-related behaviors were observed in P, one of the girls, and it was noted that she demonstrated behavioral regulation, engagement in spontaneous play again, reliably sociably responsive and age-appropriate expressive and receptive language. P was still noted to have mildly repetitive speech and behavior. So we're saying P still had some autistic traits. L was noted to have improved behavioral regulation, emerging requesting behavior, brackets, e.g. giving objects, engagement during preferred activities, e.g. peekaboo, and use of emerging phrases. L was still noted to have reduced social communication and some repetitive speech and behavior. So what I'm reading here is that the girls gained skills and they grew up a bit, and that's quite a significant developmental period. The period from, being under 2 years old to 4 years old. Any child changes a lot within that time, but it sounds like they still had autistic traits. So we had all that fanfare in the Telegraph article, and these girls are still autistic. The girls actually were given a numerical score on something called the ATEC. This is a test used to measure the effectiveness of autism treatments, and it is usually filled out by the parents of autistic children. It doesn't mention in the case report who filled this out, so I'm assuming it was the parents. L's ATEC scores improved dramatically from 76 in March 2022 to 32 in October 2023. P's ATEC scores also improved dramatically from 43 in March 2022 to 4 in October 2023. So the ATEC is not a measure of how autistic you are. How much the numbers change represents how much the treatments helped, and the lower the score, the better, the more the treatment supposedly helped. As I say, I imagine the parents filled out the ATEC. These are the same parents who have put so much time and so much money. I don't want to even think about how much money it probably was to put the girls through all of these different interventions. Are the parents the most reliable source when it comes to measuring the effectiveness of these interventions? What are the chances of them just seeing what they want to see? They may just be more likely to look out for improvements, to look out for the positives, because they're expecting positive changes. A kind of confirmation bias situation going on. The only other evidence for the girls being recovered is that one singular pediatrician said that one of the girls, the girl called P, who was measured as having, less autistic traits, initially when she was diagnosed, that she underwent a kind of miracle. This is, of course, quoted in the Telegraph article. I do wonder how effective it is to assign an autistic person a level of support needs at only 20 months old. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, and at that age, you're still very, very early on in your development. Before the age of 2 here, these girls were judged as having very high support needs, the highest support needs that an autistic person can have. They were diagnosed level 3. But we'll never know how these girls would have gone on to develop without any of these so-called treatments, which is why this report is meaningless. It's, just 2 girls. If they had really changed so much in such a short period of time, I do wonder about the accuracy of the original diagnosis. I'm not trying to doubt that they're autistic, of course, but the stability of an autism diagnosis does increase as you get older. I wonder if the stability of your support needs are the same. According to one small study, only 84% of autistic people diagnosed before the age of 36 months keep the diagnosis. Some people actually lose their diagnosis. They're deemed to be no longer autistic around the age of 3 or 4. I wonder how many of these people are truly not autistic, were truly misdiagnosed, and how many of these people maybe just have lower support needs than clinicians initially suspected. I think it makes sense that a lot of autistic people, probably particularly autistic people with lower support needs, learn to mask very, very early in life. I mean, people often say early intervention is so important. ABA therapy can be super useful even at super young, even at 2 years or younger, because even at that age, your behavior is influenced by the people around you, by positive or negative reinforcement. And even if you're not going through ABA therapy necessarily, you're still getting positive or negative reinforcement from your parents. So if you're told to stop flapping your hands and you're able to mask, you're able to do that, you may just stop flapping your hands. And then maybe by the time you get to 3 or 4, a clinician assesses you again and decides, you don't really look that autistic anymore compared to how you used to look. I definitely used to flap my hands and, show a lot more repetitive behaviors, as they call it, before I turned about 4 years old. The older I got, the more selective I was about when I did those things in front of people. When I was super, super small, I would do it in front of any adult. In general, I don't imagine that autism support levels are an exact science. I can imagine a lot of clinicians apply them differently. This was the case when we used to have different subtypes of autism, like we used to have Asperger's and autistic disorder, and they actually changed that and made it the the autism spectrum because clinicians applied those diagnoses inconsistently. What diagnosis you got depended on what clinic you went to, rather than you truly having that particular type of autism. I wonder if it's, kind of maybe the same thing with support needs. I do see a lot of infographics and lists online where they'll, try and bullet point the different traits that might mean you're level 1 autistic versus level 3 autistic. There's not a lot of consistency. They often list different traits. I do wonder how I would have been classified at 2 or 3 years old when I did flap my hands a lot. Often repetitive movements like flapping your hands are classified as a very high support needs autistic thing to do and are put in the level 3 category, despite the fact that, many autistic people with all different levels of support needs who present so differently to each other still enjoy stimming. Maybe we're just super, super hard to put in a box, particularly when you're under 2 years old, and you're still learning basic skills, you're still learning how to talk. Maybe it's too soon. Maybe we shouldn't be predicting an autistic person's future. I mean, Jason Arday, who is an autistic professor at Cambridge University, he didn't learn to speak until he was 11 years old. I like the idea of support needs as something that can fluctuate throughout an autistic person's lifetime. So maybe these girls' support needs are just lower than originally suspected. That's fine. Maybe we can just change that rather than saying their autism was reversed. I hope that these girls do keep their diagnosis so they can still have access to supports throughout school and accommodations as they get older. As the DSM-5 says, some people's autistic traits are not fully manifest until the social pressures exceed their limited capacity. And just in general, I think a lot of autistic people struggle in, late teens to early adulthood when just the general pressures of life really ramp up. In the Telegraph article, the author of this case report states that they are very unlikely to exhibit the common symptoms of autism again. They still have communication traits and perform repetitive behaviors, but okay. He then said symptoms that could return might be more along the lines of things like anxiety, gastrointestinal issues, sensory issues, but not necessarily the behavioral aspects of autism. It feels really dismissive. They might just have a little bit of anxiety, yes, Christopher, like a lot of autistic people do. And are sensory issues not a trait of autism? Since when? Has the diagnostic criteria changed? What are we talking about? I guess we're just saying that their behavior might be a little bit more socially acceptable, might be more palatable to the people around them. Do the girls seem less autistic because they have been made to feel, even at this young age, like it is not okay to be themselves? How does it make you feel to be the child of a parent like this? One of the cast members on the last US season of Love on the Spectrum, his mom actually spoke a little bit about how when he was younger, she had tried really hard to fix him, basically, to make him better, put him through a load of therapies. And she says it was only when she truly accepted him for who he is that he began to thrive. I think this kind of thinking, this kind of denial of reality puts so much pressure on parents too. And financially, what is the cost of all this? How many parents are spending thousands and thousands of dollars that they do not have to try and cure something that is incurable in their children, to basically try and, cure their personality? It's so unbelievably sad, and it's so awful that we have people who are capitalizing on this, like Dr. Reed and like the autism parent coaches. I really hope these girls are doing okay, and the parents too. It doesn't sound like a healthy situation. I guess the moral of the story is don't read the Telegraph and be very, very wary of any source that claims that autism can be or has been cured. We know autistic people can mask traits, and this is so often what people mean when they say cured. I have numerous videos about masking on my channel if you would like to check them out and know a little bit more about that. It can have serious consequences for autistic people's mental health. Also, if you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy this one I did responding to a TikTok psychology professor who's taken issue with quite a few autistic creators and with how we communicate about autism online. I thought it was quite interesting.
All autistic people do this.
Okay, and quick disclaimer, because it's the internet and it's 2024. Not all autistic people do these things in these videos.
Ah, yes, a disclaimer, because it's 2024 and not for any other reason than this is just what you do.
Has a lot of twists and turns throughout it, so probably watch all the way to the end before you form any opinions on that one. Anyway, this video took way too long. Can you tell? I don't even want to know how long it's gonna be. The script is over 8,000 words and I trimmed it down from close to 10,000. I really, really enjoyed researching this. I mean, did I enjoy it? Like I say, it made me mad. I got very, very stuck into it. You know, I got very, very into the flow state, and I feel like hopefully it was an important video to make. I don't know if my content will really ever reach people who have these sort of opinions about, you know, wanting to cure their child's autism. You can only hope. I don't know. If you would like to support me with making content like this, you are welcome to. You do not have to. I have a Patreon. You can join it for $4. There's a lot of different stuff that you can get. If you do join though, you can join the Discord server where you can chat to other neurodivergent people, people who suspect they might be neurodivergent, and people who are not autistic. Obviously, you don't have to show your diagnosis to get in. It's fine. It's just a really, really lovely place. As I say, we're doing quite a lot of fun stuff over there at the moment. We're going to play Fall Guys again soon. We have loads of different channels for all different interests that you might have, places where you can info dump about your interests, you know. You also get a load of exclusive content. I think there 15 exclusive videos up on there now. And then on higher tiers, I have podcasts, and I also have outtakes from basically every video I've posted since I started the Patreon. There's a lot to get through there if you've got through everything on this channel and you want a little bit more. Thank you so much to everybody who does support me over there. Thank you so much for watching. You can also check out Ground News if you click the link in my description. It's ground.news/nowwhat, and if you use this link or if you scan the QR code on screen, you can get 40% off their Vantage plan. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video very soon. I can't believe I finished recording this one. I thought I'd never be done. I thought I'd never be done scripting. I've still got to edit it. I don't know why I'm dancing. It's gonna be a lot of sources on screen for this one. This takes forever, but at least I'm enjoying myself. Well, as I say, it can get frustrating sometimes. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Bye.